Right, here's a question about writing specifically. So for some people, we're wondering about a female character who runs away perhaps and has to go on an adventure or on a quest or something, fantasy we're talking, and could be middle class or lower nobility, something like that. Not a stout peasant girl kind of deal, because that's a very different background with different physicality, shall we say. So the question is, what would be a good weapon for this kind of person?
Or weapon set.
Weapon set or potential options, right? So you're not the strongest person relative to other opponents you might run into. What would you pick?
So you're going to be travelling across landscape, maybe cities, maybe in the wilderness. So you want things that you can protect yourself against bandits, maybe creatures, that kind of stuff.
You're not part of a caravan, so you can't haul a bunch of things.
Okay.
You have to be careful with what you pick.
So personally, I in games that I used to play in always run, I always used to break it down in my mind into missile weapon, main sidearm. I mean, we could talk about pole arms, but pole arms are difficult to transport and carry.
Yes.
So missile weapon, sidearm, and then always a knife. Yes. I would always say you want a knife. Yeah.
For a number of reasons, be it as a tool or as a backup, etc. So, yeah, the obvious pick that I would mention is a spear, if not for the traveling constraints. Because spears are fantastic. You don't need to be terribly strong to use them effectively. You just need to know how to. You need to know your footwork and your positioning and timing, and you need to know how to fight with them, obviously.
And it's relatively simple. I mean, I always find in HEMA classes you can hand a spear to a relatively noob HEMA person, and they can hold their own against experienced sword people.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be the obvious choice. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, it's just not practical to carry around, then the question, what else? You can think small swords and rapiers. Now, rapiers do actually need a decent amount of strength, like forearm strength in particular. At first, when you pick it up, it's like, it's not that bad. Some rapiers are relatively heavy, but most of the mass is in the back there. So that in and of itself seems totally fine. But after you've been doing drills for 2 hours where you disengage and all of that, if you keep using it, it will definitely be tiring on the arms.
I would also add, within a fantasy setting, it's a particular type of sword for a specific, well, not specific, but it's catered towards a more particular type of combat. So it's more catered towards one-on-one combat, dueling, self-defense in the street, this kind of thing. If you're traveling in the wilderness and you might be attacked by, I don't know, an angry goat, a rapier isn't necessarily the right sword for it. If you might have to fight from horseback, if you might have to fight a creature or a large humanoid like an ogre or something.
I just want to know what an ogre tastes like.
Rapier is probably not the right way to go. So I think I completely agree in that when I watch people training in my and other people's HEMA classes, for the most part, the less physically robust people actually struggle more with one-handed swords, and they find it easier with two-handed swords.
Absolutely.
For all of those reasons, I actually think we might be wanting to look at a longsword.
Oh yeah.
A light one, a light longsword even, or maybe a two-handed grossmesser.
That would work.
So something two-handed but quite light. So two-handed saber, longsword, grossmesser, something like that. Because generally speaking, if you're starting out or you're just not that strong, two-handed swords you can put more of your strength into. You can control them more easily. And importantly, I'm guessing she's not travelling with armour and a shield. She's not that out there as a professional like sellsword or warrior for hire. So not having a shield, if you've got two hands free, you may as well have them both on the sword.
Yeah. I could even imagine something like the Swiss saber from the Wallace collection with the additional hand protection. That way you don't have to worry so much about it. And then you don't need necessarily to wear gauntlets, because that's always the part that's very exposed, of course.
And even if you have them, it's like the minute you're attacked, you can't quickly go, hold on a second.
Hang on, let me just put that on.
Put my gauntlets on.
I remember at one point I was kind of playing a little bit with the idea of, could you potentially place gauntlets in such a way, like hang them from your belt or like suspend them in some kind of way that you can just slip into them fairly easily. But it's not so easy. Like you can carry them
And
down.
the gloves have to be quite a tight fit for them to stay on
Exactly.
properly, so they're not quick.
Can't really just slip into that very easily. I'm actually thinking an S-stock might work quite nicely. Thrusts are so much easier to do a lot of damage with. Yeah, you cutting, not so much. The downside there is if you want to strike rather than cut with an S-stock, at least a lot of them. Some do have edges, but a lot of them, I'm thinking like the ones with square or triangular cross-section that are really primarily either thrusting or striking. Then you do need a bit more strength to bash with.
I would say if we are... So the thrusting sword, definitely. I think if we're looking at something that's a bit more cut and thrust, another option might be a katana. I think we've probably had a similar experience that if you want someone to do test cutting, for example, and you hand them a katana, it's a pretty
They do
easy.
well.
It's quite. They cut well. They're stiff. They're not very long. They're quite easy to handle. They're quite light for this, for the fact that it's a two-handed sword. So that's another something katana-esque, long messer, gross messer type, or a light-ish long sword, I'd say, or an S-stock. So that's good for a sidearm. What about missile weapon?
Well, not bows, because in order to be able to do significant amount of damage with it, it needs to have quite a stiff draw weight. And that's something that's, to us, is always very weird to see these really tiny, skinny supermodels basically running around with bows in fantasy settings. You need a lot of strength for that. Strong back muscles in particular.
I think also a lot of people's understanding of bows is based on modern material bows. And so a modern recurve bow, for example, an Olympic style recurve bow, is much more energy efficient than traditional bows. So if you get a longbow, for example, or a composite recurve bow made traditionally, you need it, for it to be militarily effective, you need it to be of a higher draw weight. And a lot of people, unless they've trained for years and years, aren't strong enough to shoot that type of bow. And the other thing is people often think about, well, I've drawn a 70-pound bow, so that's the draw weight I can shoot. No. You need to be able to shoot again and again and again. And a lot of people I know, I mean, I can pull a 100-pound draw weight, but I can't shoot with a 100-pound draw weight because I can only shoot like 2 arrows and then I need to go and pick up the 70-pound draw weight bow again, So there's a big difference between being able to physically pull a weight once and being able to, first of all, shoot repeatedly, but also accurately. And it doesn't matter how powerful your arrow is, if it doesn't hit the target, it's worth nothing. So you have to be able to shoot accurately, repeatedly, and also, drawing. If you're struggling with the draw weight while that thing's charging towards you, or someone's pulling their sword out or whatever, you're not going to be effective. No. Lighter draw weight bows, I think, can be effective weapons. So someone like Lars Anderson has shown you can shoot super fast with super light bows and hit lots of targets really quickly.
Poison arrows, maybe?
Yeah, so there might be ways that a weaker or smaller person could use a bow that would be effective for hunting, small game, and might be effective against some opponents. But if those opponents have got any kind of armor, then you need a more powerful bow.
So crossbow probably more likely.
Yes.
Which of course, the heavier drawweight crossbows are a little bit cumbersome to move around. And of course they take a long time. Yeah, exactly. They take a while. But at least you can span them and have them at the ready and you can take your time aiming, which you can't with a bow. It always bothers me in movies when they monologue and they stand there at full draw for 5 minutes.
Wait until you see the whites of their eyes.
You should be like,
Yeah, exactly.
So that's not happening. But maybe it could even be something like a fairly compact crossbow that has a spanning device that...
Goat's foot lever, they're pretty quick. So.
Maybe with like a needle bodkin or something to get the most out of it, really.
Or a variety of bolts for different things.
Yeah. So that would make sense. Thrown weapons, you need quite a bit of strength.
So in the medieval world or fantasy world, the closest thing to firearms really are crossbows, aren't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the answer, isn't it? You want your person who's maybe not trained to a high level in close combat, and not big, not strong. Crossbows, to me, the obvious answer.
It really is, yeah. When it comes to things like this, small swords, super light, but you need a lot of skill to fence with it effectively. So it could work, like Arya's needle, particularly because it's so compact, very easy to carry. makes sense, but you need to be highly trained to pull that off, really.
And you know, the problem with something like a small sword is it's designed to go against another small sword.
Yeah, it's not so
They even struggle against sabres because you struggle to parry a sabre blow with a small sword. You can do it. We occasionally fence épée or small sword against sabre, and you can do it, but you have to really parry at the base of the blade. But this is a fantasy environment where people might be swinging things like this at you.
Yes.
So,
And I keep coming back to war picks and sickles and all that because they concentrate force like crazy. So I would actually consider that a pretty good choice too. This could be combined with a buckler perhaps, or even dual wielded. Would make sense because you just don't need that much strength to cause enormous damage.
and that definitely would be the other option to having a two-handed sword, would be something that's relatively light as a one-handed thing, as Skall says, that packs a lot of punch, and this for defensive, because that means, of course, you can cover one line that's attacking at the same time as attacking back as well. So that's another good. Be another good choice. And then for a knife, I think anything that's a multi-purpose stabby knife.
You need a knife, like a Bowie knife or something that's effective for fighting and also is a good tool.
And I would say not a specialised dagger like a rondel dagger. It's something that you could also use for other things. And yeah. So there we go. We've equipped our
Or a wandering adventurer girl.
So crossbow, either a two-handed sword or something with a buckler, and lastly a knife, a general purpose cut and thrust like a dirk or a Bowie knife, something like that.
Makes sense.
There we go.
All right, let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again, Matt, for doing this video with me.